Now, my Tracy pointed out to me that I'm using bad English here because my sermon title is "You're Still Going to Get Bit." Okay, bad English, but you know what I mean. Here, look at the story. These snakes come out and they bite them and they start to die. God doesn't take the snakes away. He says, if you get bit, look the snake in the eye, face your sin, face your tyranny, face the bad thing you've had happen to you, face it, and you will live. But you'll still get bit. The children of Israel said, take it away from us. And God goes, no, you're still going to get bit, but you won't die if you face it. Now, some of you know people who've gone through tragedy and they refuse to face it. Yeah, they won't talk about the person who died. They won't talk about this terrible thing. They'll act as if it hasn't happened. But that thing will carry them and be with them for the rest of their lives. And you can see it. It's changed them because they don't face it. And so counselors today go, you know, if someone has a fear, a phobia of something, someone has a fear of going into a lift, okay? So a counselor will take them to the lift and just look at it. They'll go, face your fear. Now, here's the thing, they don't take the fear away. They make people braver. Now, the trouble with that is, of course, is that the wife who's just faced the fear and got braver goes home and then has the argument with her husband she should have had 20 years ago because now she's braver. Right? And I think of the people we think of facing what's happening and the challenges that are facing them. When I was at the general conference, there was a couple of things there. Just blew me away. They have the music's beautiful. What they do is people come forward to do a special item at various times. And all they do is put the person's name and where they come from. Some of you are aware of the hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul." When peace like a river attendeth the right way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever the cost. Yeah. Now that song was written by a guy who received news that his wife had been on a ship and it had collided with another ship and his children had died. And he actually went on a ship to meet her. She wrote back basically saying, I alone survived. And on this ship to go to where she was, the captain said, we are now passing basically where this accident happened. And that's when he wrote the hymn, Tragedy. So who walks out, but it has this name and it has from the Ukraine. And so this girl walked out, a young lady walked out, and she sang this song. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever the cost, it is well with my soul. The song finished, she just stood there for a second and just turned away. You know, the stuff that was happening in her life, she was facing it, right? Now, this story that's in the Old Testament here of the people getting bit, going from tyranny through to the promised land, and while they're waiting, they're going into the desert, and some of them going, you know, it's probably best if we could go back to the tyranny. This desert stuff's not good. And when bad things happen to you and you're there, and you sometimes go, man, if I could just go back, it was better back there. Do you know, under Stalin, books were written after the Gulag, after the death camps, by death camp guards, writing after they'd all closed down, writing, wasn't it better under Stalin? And wasn't it better under the tyranny? Now, these are guys who have killed people and going, it was so much better back then. And sometimes we look in the past and go, it's so much better back then. But if you want to pass from tyranny, and if you've got stuff in your life, you could be in the desert right now. You may be struggling with issues, and what it's saying here is look and face it. Now, all their sins, all their doubts, all their, God, why are you giving us here? Why have you given us this lousy food? Is now focused at that snake. Come with me now to John chapter 3. And we're going to be very close to the favorite verse in Scripture, which is John 3:16. For God so loved the world. Okay. But if you come down to 2 verses before the famous "For God so loved the world" bit, if you look at verse 14, it says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." So as the Israelites look towards a fiery serpent because of all the things that were happening in their lives, and God goes, you know, you're going to face challenges, you're going to face this, but it won't kill you. Look to this. Jesus comes along and says, I'm the ultimate. You look to me with all your stuff, the things that bit you, the bad things you've done, and I will say, you'll still get bit, but I promise I'm always going to be with you. So Jesus takes, you know, if you go and see the medical profession today, they have as their symbol the serpent, all the way back from there. Why? Because it represents healing. Okay? And then you bring it all the way forward to Jesus Christ, and you think about the ultimate tragedy. If you took all the tragedies, all the terrible things that have happened in people's lives, symbolized by the snakes biting these people, if you took them all together, you distill them down into one ultimate tragedy, what would that be? It is tragic when something bad happens to somebody. When we hear some stuff, what do we do about that? But what about if the person deserved it? It's not so tragic, is it? What is tragic when something bad happens to someone who clearly doesn't deserve it? How many of you yesterday, when you heard about the Queen, went, that is so sad? Because she was a good person. And we knew she was old, we knew it was coming, but it's something like, why her? You know? What is tragic when something bad happens to someone who clearly doesn't deserve it? So what's the most tragic story? The worst possible thing happening to somebody who clearly doesn't deserve it. Not only is Christ not merely innocent, he's good. He's not just good, he's as good as it gets. And yet the worst possible punishment given to the least deserving person, way worse than that, a terrible torture. Romans intentionally designed the crucifixion to give the most pain in the least possible time. Betrayed by one of your best friends at the hands of a mob of your own people who are also under tyranny. Knowing you are innocent and that you're good, you choose to be punished instead of someone they know to be guilty. So even though they're in tyranny, they go, yeah, we're in tyranny, but we're going to kill an innocent good person and allow a criminal to go free. And Jesus Christ knows all this. But the crucifixion, him hanging on the cross saying, if everyone comes to me, I'll in no wise cast out. That's not the end of the story, you and I know. It's the resurrection. When Jesus Christ is resurrected. Years ago, I was asked to come and befriend a young man who was dying of brain cancer. And I conducted his funeral. His mother was an amazing person, and it was like she just got bit when this happens. Then she had 2 other children, a boy and a girl. She was someone who had a relationship with God, that when this happened and she faced her snake, but she then looked at Christ and said, I don't know what's going on. She was in the crucible, but I trust you. I love you. I'll never forsake you. And she had a peace about her that I rarely see in anybody. I'd be jumping up and down screaming. She had another son who said, Mum, you know this girl, Jane, you've never met her. Mum, she's living in a caravan park up on the Central Coast, and she's pregnant with my child. Well, Mum, it's actually twins. And so that's the first Mum knew about it. And so her mum said to him, okay, you go up and you tell her that she's welcome to live in our home at any time. And I want you to know that I love you very much. So he drove up to the Central Coast, and while he's there talking to her and saying this, they got into a fight. And she wanted to teach him a lesson. And so she told him to get out. And she was waiting out, then he'd come calling back and they'd go on. But that's what she was doing. But on his way back down to Sydney, he ran into the back of a car and was killed, back into a truck and was killed. So again, the snake bit. And again, you kind of go, what do you do? Where do you go? If you don't believe in God, when this happens, you're in hell, right? But you know, it's not deserved. No, that's not the question. What do you do? If you're in hell, do you just keep getting bitter or anything? If with Christ, this lady goes, oh, I've got to look to him. The only way I'm going to get through this, I'm not going to ignore it. I love my son. So I was asked to go up and knock on the door of this caravan to tell the girl. And so when I said who I was and I was a friend of so-and-so, before I could even start, she kind of launched into, I taught him a lesson, didn't I? And I thought, oh, before you go any further, I need to tell you something. She did move in with her mother-in-law. And so she looked after her. And I go, okay, how many snakes do you get bit? That wasn't it. She found out, she had a little girl, and then she found out that her second husband actually had a lot of child pornography stuff on his computer, and the police were after him. So she had to get her daughter out of that situation. She's now really happily married and what have you. But you all have stories, maybe not as horrific as that, but all of us, and if you don't, you will, of us getting bit. And in this story, we find how God says, I want you out of tyranny. I don't want you to be hurt like this. I want to bring you out of that. I want to take you to the promised land. Now, it may only be when Jesus Christ comes again, but his journey is where he wants to take us. And through it, you will go through the desert. You will get bit. Christ says, when I am lifted up, I will draw all men, women to me. My plea to you is, in the good times, it's so easy to praise God then. But in the bad times, when you're worried about your children, you're worried about your grandchildren, you're worried about this or that, you're worried about things in your own life, may I challenge you to keep your eyes focused on the one who is lifted up, who loves you so much. He goes, the devil's here and he's trying to wreck your life, but you look to me and I will never leave you or forsake you. Our last hymn this morning is my favorite, To God Be the Glory. Will you sing it with me?